Laurel Andrews put the pot of stew on the table and sat down across from her husband. Malcolm didn't look up, concentrating on the screen of his phone. His right hand mechanically reached into the bread box and pulled out a slice of wheat bread. 17 minutes past 5 in the evening, Wednesday. Their dinner together began right on schedule, as it always had in recent months. Evansville, outside the windows of their suburban home, was already preparing for evening. An ordinary, unremarkable town in Indiana, with identical rows of neat houses on quiet streets where all the neighbors said hello to each other but rarely stopped by to visit. The spring light was fading in the tree crowns, leaving whimsical shadows on the kitchen floor. Laurel followed one of them across the floor to the dining table where her husband sat, almost as distant and unreachable as a shadow. "How was your day?" she asked, picking up a piece of meat with her fork. "It was fine," Malcolm answered, keeping his eyes on the screen. "And you?" "There was a bad case on the ward. They brought in a boy, 11 years old, bicycle accident, fractured femur, multiple contusions." The conversation died before it started. Laurel sighed and lowered her gaze to her plate. 15 years of marriage, and what they'd come to was silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery against plates. Malcolm had always been taciturn, but before that taciturnity had masked attentiveness. He'd listened, really listened, when she talked about her shifts at the hospital. Now he was just physically present, having gone somewhere deep inside himself since he'd lost his job at the architecture firm 8 months ago. 8 months, 244 days of silence and detachment. Laurel could have drawn a timeline of their estrangement. First, there were excuses, then promises of new work, then disappointments, then just nothing. Malcolm stopped trying. "I thought I'd stop by your parents' house this weekend," Laurel said, breaking the silence. "Your mom called yesterday, asking about you." "I'd rather not." Malcolm put the phone away and looked at her for the first time during dinner. "I don't want them to see me like this." "Like what, Malcolm?" Laurel set her fork aside. "They're your parents. They're worried." "Unemployed loser," he said in a casual tone, as if he were stating an obvious fact. "They were always so proud of their successful architect's son. And now—" He shrugged, not finishing the sentence. "You're not a failure," Laurel said automatically. How many times had she repeated those words in the last few months? Hundreds. Just temporary difficulties. None of them believed in those words. 8 months was no longer temporary difficulties. Laurel studied his face, the sharpened features, the new wrinkles around his eyes. Malcolm had always been thin, but now he looked haggard. At 42, his dark blonde hair had already turned gray at the temples, and a dull apathy had settled into the blue eyes that had once shone with good-natured humor. His tall figure, once upright, now often slouched as if under the weight of an invisible weight. They had once been different. They'd met at a charity event. Malcolm was designing the new wing of the hospital where Laurel worked. They'd noticed each other right away. He joked that he'd fallen in love with her laugh, and she with his hands, always stained with lead, with long fingers capable of creating worlds on paper. Those same hands were now lying on the table, clean, without a trace of creativity. "I'm still looking," he said, and Laurel didn't immediately realize what he meant. "A job?" "Yeah. Sent out a few more resumes today." "That's good." Laurel tried to put enthusiasm into her voice that she didn't feel. "How many resumes has he sent out so far?" 200, 300. Right now, for a 42-year-old architect who had fallen out of the profession even for a short time, the market was merciless. Young graduates with fresh ideas and a willingness to work for less were filling every vacancy. Malcolm nodded and went back to his plate, chewing his food absent-mindedly. Laurel knew he couldn't taste it. He hadn't tasted much at all lately. After dinner, they cleared the table, quietly, coherently, without interfering with each other, like a well-rehearsed dance between two strangers. Malcolm went into the living room to watch television, and Laurel stayed in the kitchen to finish the dishes. A typical evening for the average American family. Everything's right, everything's in place, except that there was a chasm between them that couldn't be spoken of. Laurel wiped her hands and looked at her reflection in the window pane. At 39, she still looked attractive, dark hair with a slight red at the ends, gathered in a careless bun, brown eyes, though shaded with fatigue, still vibrant. Her nurse's hands, strong with short nails and skin a little dry from frequent washing, were those of a person accustomed to caring for others. But how do you care for someone who's walled off? Laurel remembered their last real conversation 3 months ago. Malcolm had come back from another bad job interview. "They didn't even look at my work," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed as Laurel got ready for bed. "They just said they were looking for someone with a modern vision." "You know what that means?" "What?" "That I'm old, outdated, out of date." "You're only 42, she countered. "I'm already a dinosaur in this field." He grinned bitterly. "You know what's ironic? That guy who interviewed me, I taught him at a summer internship 8 years ago. He didn't even recognize me. After that, Malcolm stopped sharing even failures. He'd just leave in the mornings, come back in the evenings, and spend hours staring at the TV or phone screen. Their bedroom, once a place of closeness and warmth, had become cold territory where they went to bed with their backs turned to each other like strangers. Laurel couldn't remember the last time they'd made love. Maybe 5 months ago? Or 6? At first she'd tried to initiate intimacy, but Malcolm's constant refusals hurt more, and finally, she'd just stopped trying. The phone in her pocket vibrated. A message from Christine, her co-worker, and perhaps the only close friend in town. "How are you? Did you remember tomorrow's coffee?" Laurel felt a pang of guilt. She had indeed forgotten. It wasn't surprising, though. Lately her life had narrowed down to work and home, where her ghost husband was waiting for her. "Of course I remember. I'll see you at 3, she replied, though she wasn't sure she could keep up a casual conversation. Through the wall came the muffled sound of a television, some talk show, judging by the bursts of laughter. Malcolm watched, but hardly saw it. Laurel suddenly felt suffocated in this house, full of silent recriminations and unspoken words. She stepped out into the backyard, breathing in the cool evening air. Their house, a typical 1.5-story structure with 3 bedrooms, one of which had been turned into Malcolm's office and the other was empty, stood on a small plot of land. Nothing special, an ordinary house for an ordinary family. They'd bought it 10 years ago, with plans for children that never came. At first they'd put it off. Malcolm's career was taking off. Laurel was getting further education. Then there were 2 failed attempts, a miscarriage, long months of checkups. In the end, they decided that maybe fate had decided otherwise. The white fence, the neat lawn, the bed of daffodils Laurel had planted 3 years ago. It was just like everyone else's. And yet, something went wrong. The next day, sitting across from Christine at the cafe, Laurel tried to pretend she was fine, but her friend quickly figured her out. "You look like crap," Christine said as she sipped her latte. "Thanks for the compliment," Laurel smiled weakly. "I meant it. You have circles under your eyes the size of the Great Lakes. What's going on?" Laurel twirled her coffee cup in her hands. Christine, with her directness and perpetual motion energy, had always intimidated her a little. Tall, angular, with short platinum hair and bright lipstick, she was the exact opposite of Laurel's reserved self. And yet there was no nurse in the surgical ward more attentive and caring than Christine. "It's the same," Laurel finally admitted. "Malcolm, he's just not here. Physically, yes, but not." She was silent, not knowing how to explain the feeling. "Not emotionally," Christine finished for her. "It's a familiar story. My first husband went crazy after his company went bankrupt. only he started drinking. Malcolm doesn't drink, Laurel shook her head. Sometimes I think it would be easier if he was screaming or hysterical or even drunk. Anything but this silence. Have you tried talking to him? Hundreds of times. He either doesn't say anything or he says it's okay and it'll get better. Christine leaned back in her chair, scrutinizing her friend. You know, sometimes it takes something serious to shake a person up. Shock therapy. What do you mean? Well, for example, Christine leaned closer, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a state secret. You could make him jealous. Jealous? Laurel frowned. Are you suggesting I cheat? God, no! Christine rolled her eyes. I'm suggesting you create an illusion. Play a trick on him to make him think he might lose you. Sometimes men need a reminder that a good woman isn't an eternal given, but a gift from fate. Laurel shook her head. That sounds like the plot of a cheap melodrama. Sometimes cheap melodramas know more about life than we'd like to admit, Christine shrugged. Just think about it. And Laurel thought about it. At first she dismissed the idea as absurd, but it kept coming back, especially when that evening Malcolm didn't even look up when she walked into the room in her new nightgown, the same cream-colored one with lace that he'd once loved so much. What if Christine was right? What if Malcolm needs a reminder that she's not just a convenient piece of furnishings, but a woman he once loved passionately, a woman other men might find attractive? The thought was taking deeper root. After all, what did she have to lose? Their marriage already looked like a living corpse. Maybe shock therapy really was what they needed. The idea took final shape when the next day at the hospital she ran into Finley Baird, a new radiologist who had recently transferred from Chicago. Finley was a little younger than her, maybe 35 or 36, with an open smile and disposable manners. Laurel liked his quiet professionalism and sense of humor. "Dr. Baird," she called out to him in the hallway. "Finley, please," he smiled. "We had a deal." "Finley," Laurel felt herself blush. "I have an unusual favor to ask of you." Finley Baird listened to Laurel's plan with an impenetrable expression. They were sitting in a small cafe across the street from the hospital, away from the prying eyes of their colleagues. "So, let me get this straight," he said, stirring his coffee. "You want me to come to your house, play the part of your beau, make your husband jealous?" Spoken aloud, especially in his calm, judicious tone, it sounded even more ridiculous than it did in Laurel's head. "Sounds awful, doesn't it?" Laurel grinned unhappily. "I understand if you say no. It's a strange request, and I didn't say no." Finley smiled at the corner of his mouth. "I just want to know what I'm getting myself into. The plan seems risky. It's a desperate move, I know. But Finley—" Laurel hesitated for words. "I've tried everything. Talking, therapy, trying to get the romance back. He just, he's gone somewhere. I can't reach him. I think he needs a shock, something to make him wake up." Finley scrutinized her face with his dark brown eyes. It wasn't judgment, but rather concern. "What if it doesn't work the way you expect? What if it just explode?" "Malcolm's not the exploding type." Laurel shook her head. "He's always been reserved. Too much so." "People change under pressure," Finley said quietly. Laurel knew he was right, but the despair that had been building up for months needed an outlet. She couldn't live in this limbo anymore, in a marriage that had become two ghosts living together. "I understand the risk," she said, "but I have to do something. Please, Finley." He was silent for a long minute, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but I need to know all the details. What exactly are we supposed to say, do? And most importantly, how far should it go?" Laurel felt the color rush to her cheeks. "Nothing. Anything like that. Just make it look like it. You pick me up. I'll introduce you as a friend from work. We'll leave together. I'll tell Malcolm I don't know when I'll be back. Maybe hint that I'll stay at your place. And then we'll just drive around the block and come back." Finley sighed. That sounds like a plan. A really bad plan, but a plan nonetheless. When are we doing this? This Friday, Laurel replied firmly. Malcolm will be home from 6. Over the next few days, Laurel was ready to give up several times. Doubt gnawed at her every time she looked at her husband, deep in his quiet apathy. What if Finley was right and everything would go wrong? What if this prank would only deepen the chasm between them? But then another silent evening would come, and she'd realize that things just couldn't get any worse. Friday came all too quickly. Laurel chose her outfit carefully, not too revealing but not casual either. A dark blue dress just above her knees that emphasized her figure but stayed within the bounds of propriety. She put on light makeup and let her hair down. Catching her reflection in the mirror, Laurel was surprised to note that she looked younger and livelier than she had in months. Malcolm came home at 6:20. He seemed more tired than usual. He nodded silently at her, glanced at her outfit but said nothing. Didn't ask why she was dressed like that, where she was going. He simply walked to the kitchen, pulled a bottle of water from the refrigerator and sat on the couch with his tablet. Laurel felt a prick of disappointment. Even her unusual appearance hadn't piqued his interest. This apathy was worse than any argument. At 7:15, the doorbell rang. Laurel's heart beat faster. She inhaled deeply, exhaled, and went to open it. Finley looked good. Dark jeans, light-colored shirt, leather jacket. He smiled at her, but his eyes remained serious. "Hey," he said loud enough for Malcolm to hear. "Are you ready to go?" "Yeah," Laurel smiled back, trying to keep her voice sounding nonchalant. "Come in for a minute, and I'll get my purse." Finley walked into the hallway, and Laurel led him into the living room where Malcolm was still sitting. "Darling," she said, and this address, which she hadn't used in a long time, sounded strangely artificial. "This is Finley, my colleague from the hospital. Finley, this is my husband, Malcolm." Malcolm slowly raised his eyes from the clipboard. His gaze slid over Finley, then Laurel, lingering on her dress, her heels, her loose hair. Something flashed in his eyes, too quickly for Laurel to realize what it was. "Nice to meet you," he said without standing up. His voice sounded flat, unemotional. "Likewise," Finley nodded. Laurel saw his shoulders tense. There was an awkward pause. Laurel cleared her throat. "We're going to have dinner together. Finley has tickets to a jazz concert." Malcolm nodded, his face impenetrable. "Okay, have a good time." Didn't ask where exactly they were going. Didn't ask when she'd be back. Just went back to his clipboard as if they'd already left. Laurel felt her insides clench. Did he really care that much? But it was too late to back out. "Come on," she told Finley a little louder than necessary. "I won't keep you." She grabbed her purse and threw on a light coat. She turned at the door. "Don't wait up for me, Malcolm. I might be back late, or even stay at Finley's." She'd expected some kind of reaction, surprise, anger, resentment, anything. Malcolm lifted his head. There was nothing but calmness on his face. Not even cold calm, just the calm of a man who'd heard the weather forecast for tomorrow. "All right," he said. "See you tomorrow, then." Then he looked down at the screen again. Laurel felt Finley tugging on her arm. They left the house and got into his car, a modest gray sedan. As soon as the door closed, Laurel exhaled. "God, that was awful." "Yeah," Finley started the engine. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" "He's always been a master at keeping his emotions in check." Laurel shook her head. "But I've never seen him like this. Like he doesn't care who I'm with or where I'm going." "Maybe it's a defensive reaction," Finley suggested, pulling onto the road. "People react to stress in different ways." "Maybe," Laurel said uncertainly. "Let's just drive around the block and come back in 10 minutes. I want to see what he'll do when he's alone." Finley nodded and turned onto a nearby street. They drove in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Laurel looked out the window at the lighted houses floating past, behind which lived other families with their stories, their joys and their problems. I wondered how many of them had been through similar crises, how many were able to overcome them. Exactly 10 minutes later, Finley parked around the corner of their house. "I'll come with you," he said, turning off the engine. "I don't want you to go in alone." "It'll be fine," Laurel objected, but was grateful for his concern. They walked up to the house. There was a light on in the living room windows, exactly where they'd left Malcolm. Laurel pulled out her keys, opened the door cautiously. "Malcolm?" she called out, entering the hallway. "It's me." Silence. Only the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. "Malcolm?" She went into the living room. It was empty. A tablet lay on the couch, turned on but with the screen off. Laurel went into the kitchen, looked in the bedroom, her husband's office. No one anywhere. "He's not here," she said to Finley, who had returned to the living room. "Maybe he went out? To the store, maybe?" Laurel glanced at the coat rack by the door. Malcolm's jacket was gone, and his shoes. And the car, she'd just noticed, was gone from the driveway too. "Yeah, it must be," she agreed uncertainly. It was odd. He rarely went out in the evenings. "Maybe he's following us," Finley suggested, concern in his voice. "I don't think so." Laurel shook her head. It wasn't his style. But something inside her clenched. This whole thing seemed silly and petty now. Why had she even bothered with this childish prank? "I think you'd better leave," she said to Finley. "I'll wait for him and explain everything." Finley hesitated. "Are you sure? I could stay until he gets back." "No, it's okay. Really," she tried to smile. "Thank you. And I'm sorry about, all of this." After Finley left, Laurel sat down on the couch and waited. An hour, 2, 3. Malcolm didn't come back, didn't answer calls or texts. By midnight, worry turned to anxiety. By 2 a.m., anxiety turned to fear. What if something had happened to him? What if he was driving in a distraught state and had an accident? She called the local hospitals. There were no patients with the name Malcolm Andrews anywhere. That reassured her a little, but it didn't explain where he was. At 3 in the morning, exhausted with worry and guilt, Laurel finally fell asleep on the couch. She awoke to the sound of the front door opening. It was 6 in the morning on the clock. Laurel jumped up, rushing into the hallway. Malcolm looked tired but collected. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. When he saw Laurel, he stopped, his face expressionless with surprise. "Where have you been?" she blurted out. "I was worried." "I slept at a motel," he answered calmly. "I needed to think." "Malcolm, listen, what happened yesterday? It's not what you think." Laurel took a step toward him, but he pulled away. "Finley's just a friend. It was a stupid prank to what?" His voice remained steady, but something changed in his eyes. Not anger, no. More like determination. "To make me jealous? Shake me up?" "Yes," Laurel admitted, tears welling up in her throat. "You and I have become like strangers. You don't talk to me. You don't notice me. I didn't know what else to do." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand. You're right. I've been aloof. That's my fault. But what you did yesterday..." He shook his head. "It opened my eyes." "In what way?" Laurel felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this stupid plan had worked after all. "That our marriage was over," Malcolm said simply. No anger, no accusations. A statement of fact. "We both deserve better than this. Existence." Laurel felt the ground slipping from under her feet. "No, Malcolm, you don't understand. It was just a prank, a stupid prank. Finley and I didn't even go anywhere. We drove around the block and were back in 10 minutes. This isn't about Finley," Malcolm rubbed his eyes tiredly. "It's about us. It's what we've become to each other. You're right. I've become distant. After I lost my job, I felt empty, useless. I didn't want to drag you down with me, but instead of talking about it, I just, passed out. We can fix this, Laurel argued hotly. Start over. Go to therapy. I've already made an appointment with a lawyer, Malcolm interrupted her. There was no gloating or bitterness in his voice, just fatigue. Tonight at 11. The divorce will be civilized. I'm not going to contest anything. The house will stay yours. Laurel stared at him, unable to believe her ears. It had all happened too fast, too drastically. From a normal life to total destruction overnight. You can't do this, she whispered. Not because of one stupid mistake. It's not an impulsive decision, Malcolm shook his head. I've been thinking about it for months. It's just that last night was the catalyst. He paused. I'll stay at my parents' house until I find an apartment. I'll pick up my stuff later when you're not home. With those words, he turned and walked to the bedroom. Laurel stood, paralyzed with shock, listening as he methodically gathered the essentials into a travel bag. 15 minutes later, he came out with the bag in his hand, walking past her to the door. Malcolm, please, her voice trailed off. Let's at least talk. Don't do this. He stopped in the doorway, turned around. His face softened. I'm sorry, Laurel. I didn't mean for it to end this way, but maybe it's for the best, for both of us. And he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Laurel spent the next week in a fog. She went to work, mechanized her duties, returned to an empty house. Malcolm didn't call, didn't write. It was as if he'd vanished. On the 7th day after he left, she found an envelope in the mailbox with papers from his lawyer. Malcolm had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, the most streamlined, impersonal explanation possible, but that was just the beginning. A day later, the insurance company called with details of her new status. Turns out Malcolm had taken her off his health insurance, the same one that had covered them both through his former job thanks to a generous severance package. Then came the notice from the bank that their joint account had been closed. Malcolm withdrew all the money, exactly half the amount, not a dime more, not a dime less, and transferred it to a new personal account. And then there was the strangest thing of all, a letter from the insurance company about the change of beneficiary on Malcolm's life insurance policy. Previously, in the event of his death, she would get all the money. Now, it was his parents. It was all done quietly, methodically, without a single phone call or explanation. It was as if Malcolm was erasing any trace of their 15-year marriage from his life, legally and financially cutting all ties that connected them. Sitting at the kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of her, Laurel tried to comprehend what had happened. Her foolish prank had led to a disaster of proportions she never thought possible. She'd wanted to shake her husband up, to bring him back to life, and she'd succeeded. Except that it was not love that revived in him, but a cold determination to break off all relations. When the phone rang, she answered it without even looking at the screen. Laurel? It was the voice of her mother-in-law, Eleanor Andrews. Can you explain what's going on? Malcolm's been living with us for a week, filed for divorce, but he refuses to say what happened. All he said was that you grew out of the relationship. What happened? Laurel closed her eyes. How to explain to her husband's mother that she had ruined her own marriage with a stupid, childish prank? How to admit that, instead of supporting her husband through a difficult time, she'd decided to play the jealousy game? Yeah, I made a mistake, Eleanor, she said at last. A terrible mistake. 2 weeks passed without a word from Malcolm. Laurel called his parents, but they said he'd already moved out, renting a small apartment on the north side of Evansville. They didn't know the address, or didn't want to tell her. She could sense the alienation in their voices, too. Whatever Malcolm had told them, it definitely wasn't the complete truth, but it didn't make her look good either. Several times Laurel tried to call her husband, but he didn't answer. Her messages went unread. The only contact she had with him was from his lawyer, dry, formal letters about the divorce proceedings and the division of property. The papers lay untouched on the kitchen table. Laurel couldn't bring herself to sign them. This wasn't how their marriage was supposed to end, over a stupid joke, without a single conversation, without a single attempt to make things right. One night, unable to sleep in their shared bed, which now seemed too big and empty, Laurel made up her mind. She must find Malcolm. Talk to him in person, not through lawyers. Explain everything, make him listen. Even if it didn't change his mind, she would at least try. In the morning, she called the hospital and took the day off, citing personal circumstances. Then she got in her car and began methodically driving around the neighborhood where his parents said Malcolm had rented an apartment. It wasn't the most prosperous part of town. Old apartment buildings, time-worn, with peeling paint and rusty fire escape ladders. Not the place she expected to find her husband. 3 hours of searching yielded no results. Laurel stopped at a small cafe for a coffee and to gather her thoughts. She was almost despairing when she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the street. Malcolm looked different, thin, unshaven, wearing an old jacket she hadn't seen in years. He walked briskly, absorbed in his own thoughts, not looking around. Laurel threw the money on the table and ran out of the cafe. "Malcolm!" she shouted as she crossed the street, ignoring the honking of cars. He turned around, and for a split second, something like joy flashed in his eyes. But then his face became impenetrable again. "What are you doing here?" he asked as she ran up to him. "Looking for you," Laurel breathed out. "We need to talk, please." Malcolm was silent for a moment, then nodded toward a small public garden nearby. But just for a little while. They sat down on a bench, keeping their distance from each other. It was empty, a weekday. Most people were at work. Only an elderly man was walking a small dog in the far alley. "How are you?" Laurel asked, not knowing where to begin. "I'm fine," Malcolm answered. He looked tired, but there was a new light in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. "Got a job." "Really?" Laurel was surprised. "Where?" "At a construction company. Not as an architect, of course. Assistant foreman. It's temporary, but it's a start." That's great," Laurel said sincerely. "I'm happy for you." There was a pause. Laurel gathered her thoughts, searching for words. Finally, she decided, "Malcolm, what happened that night with Finley? It was a stupid, childish prank. I tried to, I don't know, shake you up, get your attention. You were so far away, even though you were right there. I felt like I was losing you." Malcolm looked away at the playground with the empty swings. "I know it was a prank, Laurel. I'm not a complete idiot. Finley's not your type." He grinned bitterly. "But that's not the point." "Then what is it about?" "The fact that you thought such a stunt would fix anything at all." Malcolm turned to her. "Instead of just talking to me, making me listen, you decided to play a game. And you know what? It opened my eyes to what we'd become, that our marriage had become a farce." "It wasn't," Laurel argued vehemently. "Yes, I made a mistake. But one stupid thing doesn't make 15 years together go away." "It's not about one mistake," Malcolm shook his head. "It's what we've come to the point where it seemed like the smart thing to do in the first place." He paused. "I don't blame you alone. I do too. Locking myself in my shell, shutting you out. But maybe it was a sign that we, exhausted." "I love you," Laurel said simply. "And I know that somewhere deep down inside you still love me too." Malcolm was silent for a long moment. Then he said softly, "Love isn't all there is to marriage, Laurel. Sometimes it's not enough." They sat there, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Suddenly Laurel noticed Malcolm tense up, looking behind her. She turned around and saw 2 men walking toward them at a brisk pace. Something in their gait, in the way they kept their hands in their pockets, made her instantly uneasy. Come on. Malcolm stood up, pulling her with him. We'd better get going. But it was too late. The men had already approached the bench. One of them, tall, with an unpleasant smile, blocked their way. Andrews, right? He said, turning to Malcolm. You owe someone money. I don't owe anyone anything, Malcolm replied, instinctively shoving Laurel behind him. You have me confused with someone else. I don't think so. The second man, a stocky man with a shaved head, stood on the other side, blocking his escape route. Jimmy Logan says hi. Says you owe him $2,000. Laurel felt Malcolm tense up even more. I don't know any Jimmy Logan. That's odd, the first man grinned. But he knows you. He says you lost $2,000 at his place last Friday. Laurel looked at her husband in confusion. The joint? What joint? Look. Malcolm's voice sounded calm, but Laurel could feel his hand still holding hers trembling. There must be some mistake. I wasn't at any establishment last Friday. Yeah? Well, our friend says you were. The bald man pulled a penknife out of his pocket and began cleaning his fingernails casually. And you know, we tend to believe him over you. I don't have that kind of money on me, Malcolm said calmly, but Laurel could feel his heart racing. That's okay, the tall man smirked. We can wait for you to get it. Or bail something out. His gaze slid to Laurel. You have a lovely wife. It all happened very quickly. Malcolm shoved Laurel to the side, shouting, Run! And lunged at the tall man, catching him off guard. They rolled on the ground. The bald man cursed and rushed toward them. Laurel didn't run. She pulled a can of pepper spray out of her purse, a necessary precaution for a nurse who often returned home after a night shift, and fired a blast directly into the bald man's face, aiming for his eyes. The man screamed, clutching his face, and recoiled. But Malcolm was still fighting the first attacker, and he was stronger. Laurel saw the glint of a knife. When had he gotten it? And she heard a cry of pain. Malcolm collapsed. The tall man stood up, breathing heavily. There was blood on his hand. He glanced at his partner squirming on the ground, then at Laurel with the can, and suddenly he was running. A few seconds later, the bald man, still panting and wiping at his eyes, followed him. Laurel rushed over to Malcolm. He was lying on his side, pressing his hand to his stomach. Blood oozed from between his fingers. Hold on, she whispered, pulling out her cell phone. I'm going to call an ambulance. As she dialed 911, Malcolm looked at her with strangely clear eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't want you to find out. Shh, don't talk now. Laurel was already explaining to the dispatcher what had happened and where they were. Her medical training automatically took over. Her voice was calm, clear, even though everything inside was shattering with fear. Finished talking, she took off her jacket and pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Malcolm grimaced at the pain. What is this place, Malcolm? She couldn't help herself. What were they talking about? He closed his eyes. An underground casino. I went there a couple times, after that night with Finley. Wanted to feel something, anything. Laurel bit her lip to keep from crying. This was what her stupid plan had led to: underground casinos, debt, stabbings. Hold on, she repeated. The ambulance was on its way. Malcolm nodded weakly, his eyes starting to close. Hey, stay awake. Laurel patted him lightly on the cheek. Look at me. Talk to me. Talk to me about what? His voice was getting weaker and weaker. Anything. About the first time we met. Remember? The charity event, he tried to smile. You were wearing a blue dress, and you laughed at my stupid joke. It was really stupid, Laurel smiled through her tears. Something about architects and their big blueprints. Egos, Malcolm corrected. Big egos. A siren wailed in the distance. Laurel breathed a sigh of relief that help was close at hand, but Malcolm suddenly squeezed her hand tighter. If I don't survive... Don't even think that, Laurel cut him off. You will live. Do you hear me? You will live." But his eyes were already closed, and the hand that had been clutching her fingers went slack. Everything in the hospital was a kaleidoscope. The bright lights, the running medics, the soothing voice explaining to her that her husband was being taken away for surgery. Laurel sat in the waiting room staring at one point, not noticing the tears streaming down her face. It seemed like an eternity before the surgeon, a tired, middle-aged man with kind eyes, approached her. "Mrs. Andrews?" He sat down next to her. "Your husband is out of danger. The knife nicked his liver and there was a lot of blood loss, but we've stabilized him." Laurel exhaled, only now realizing she'd barely breathed the whole time. "When can I see him?" "He's in the ICU right now. He's in an induced coma for now, which is better for his recovery." "In a coma?" Laurel questioned, feeling her heart clench with fear again. "It's a controlled state," the surgeon reassured her. "We'll gradually bring him out of it over the next 24 to 48 hours, depending on the dynamics." He was quiet for a moment. "But I must warn you, there were complications during the operation. Head trauma." "What head trauma?" Laurel looked at him confused. "He was stabbed in the abdomen." "He hit his head on the corner of a bench when he fell," the surgeon explained. At first glance, the injury seemed minor, but during the operation, brain swelling began to build up. "We've done everything necessary, but there may be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Laurel's voice was shaking. "It's hard to say in advance." The surgeon spoke softly but honestly. "From short-term memory problems to more serious neurological damage. We'll know more when he regains consciousness." For the next 3 days, Laurel hardly left the hospital, going home only to shower and change clothes. She sat by Malcolm's bedside, holding his hand, talking to him even though he couldn't respond. Talking about their first days together, about traveling, about funny incidents, about the dreams they had once shared. Cried, prayed, though she had never been particularly religious. On the 3rd day, the doctors began gradually reducing the doses of the drugs that kept Malcolm in a coma. The entire medical staff, many of whom were Laurel's colleagues, monitored his condition with special attention. Finley had stopped by twice, bringing coffee and sandwiches that Laurel barely touched, urging her to get at least a few hours of sleep. She refused, afraid of missing the moment when Malcolm would wake up. On the 4th day, when she was almost dozing in the chair by his bed, exhausted from sleepless nights, Laurel felt the light movement of his fingers in her hand. She woke up instantly and leaned toward her husband. "Malcolm, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. His gaze was unfocused, cloudy, but gradually clearing. He blinked several times as if trying to get his bearings. "I'll get the doctor." Laurel reached for the call button. "Wait." His voice was weak, hoarse from the long silence. Where am I?" "At the hospital." Laurel squeezed his hand. "You were hurt. Do you remember what happened?" Malcolm shook his head slowly, wincing at the pain that even that small movement caused. "No, He fell silent, looking at her with confusion. "Who are you?" Laurel felt her heart drop somewhere downward. "I'm Laurel, your wife." Malcolm looked at her with a long, incomprehensible stare. "Wife? I don't remember. I'm sorry." Laurel pressed the call button, and a minute later the neurologist, an elderly Dr. Harris with whom she had worked many times on the ward, entered the room. "Mr. Andrews, good to see you awake," he smiled, checking Malcolm's pupils with a flashlight. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Malcolm answered, "and I don't remember anything." Dr. Harris looked at Laurel. "Nothing? Nothing at all?" "Vague images." Malcolm furrowed his brow, trying to focus. "I know my name is Malcolm. Andrews, right?" He looked questioningly at Laurel and she nodded. "But the rest of it, it's a blur." "It's not uncommon with head trauma," Dr. Harris said calmly. "Retrograde amnesia. often temporary. He asked Malcolm a few more questions, checked his reactions and coordination. Everything looks good. Memory can come back gradually, in fragments. The key is not to rush things. Give the brain time to recover. When the doctor left, Laurel sat on the edge of the bed. "You really don't remember anything?" she asked quietly. "Our house, your job, our last conversations?" Malcolm looked at her carefully, as if trying to solve a riddle. "I'm sorry. It's all a blur. I see your face and I feel like I should know you. I should know you. But the details—" He shook his head. Laurel felt strangely relieved. The amnesia was giving them a chance to start over, to forget about the prank, the casino, the divorce, a fresh start. But that wouldn't be fair. Building a relationship on lies and defaults was exactly what had caused it to fail. "Malcolm," she began, determined to be honest, "before you were injured, we were getting a divorce." His eyes widened. "Divorce? Why?" Laurel took a deep breath and told him everything, about his job loss, about the depression, about her stupid prank with Finley, about his reaction and his decision to cut all ties, about the underground casino, the assault, the trauma. Malcolm listened intently, not interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, digesting the information. "It's strange," he finally said, "to hear your life story as if it had happened to someone else." "I know it's a lot of information all at once." Laurel touched his arm gently. "We can slow down." The doctor said to take our time. "No, I want to know." Malcolm wrinkled his nose at the pain in his head. It's hard to reconcile what you're telling me with the void in my memory." Over the next few days, his condition gradually improved. Physically, he was on the mend. His wound was healing well, his headaches were becoming less frequent. But his memory was not coming back, although the doctors remained optimistic, saying it was only a matter of time. Laurel came every day bringing pictures, telling stories of their life together. Malcolm listened with interest, sometimes asking questions, but it was like a story about a stranger. She showed him pictures from their wedding, from their travels, from home. He looked at them with curiosity, sometimes lingering on some of them as if trying to catch echoes of memory. On his 10th day in the hospital, when Laurel was telling him how they'd chosen their home, Malcolm suddenly interrupted her. "Laurel," he said quietly but firmly, "I have something to tell you." Something in his voice made her tense. "What is it?" "I remember," he said simply. "I remember everything, from the beginning." "What?" She looked at him blankly. "You mean, your memory came back?" "It never went away." Malcolm looked away. "I was faking amnesia." Laurel stared at him stunned. "But why?" "I don't know." He ran his hand over his face. "When I woke up and saw you, so exhausted sitting by my bedside, I thought it would give us a break. From the divorce, from all this. A chance to just, be together, unburdened by the past." He grinned bitterly. Silly, wasn't it? Laurel felt a mixture of emotions sweep over her. Resentment, disappointment, but somewhere deep inside, relief, too. Because faking amnesia meant that somewhere deep down, he didn't want to break their bond completely either. "Why did you decide to confess now?" she asked. "Because it's not fair to you," Malcolm answered. "You come here every day, putting yourself out there, trying to help me remember. And I'm lying to you. I don't want there to be lies and innuendo between us again, even if it means we go back to divorce." Laurel was silent for a long time, digesting his words. "Do you still want a divorce?" she finally asked. Malcolm sighed heavily. "Yes, Laurel. I've been thinking about it a lot here at the hospital. And despite everything that's happened, I still think it's best for us to separate." He looked her straight in the eye. "I'm grateful for your concern, and for being there for me all these days. But that doesn't change the fact that our marriage is long over. We both know that." 2 weeks later, Malcolm was released from the hospital. Laurel took him home, though he resisted the decision, insisting he could go to his rented apartment. The doctors sided with Laurel, explaining that he would need care for the first time, and he reluctantly agreed. Their home greeted them with silence. It was exactly the same as the day Malcolm had left after the prank with Finley, but it felt different, like they were both guests in some museum of their past lives. "I made the bed in the guest bedroom," Laurel said, helping Malcolm get settled. "I thought you'd be more comfortable than on the couch." "Thank you." He sat down gingerly on the edge of the bed, wincing at the pain in his stomach. The wound was healing well, but it was still painful when he made sudden movements. "Are you hungry? I can cook something." "No need. I'm not hungry," he replied, looking away. "You don't have to make such a fuss over me, Laurel. I'm fine." "I know," she faltered in the doorway. "I just want to help." Malcolm sighed. "I appreciate it. I really do. But we both know I'm only here until I'm strong enough to live on my own. And then we'll continue with the divorce proceedings." Laurel felt a lump come up to her throat. She inhaled deeply, trying to control her emotions. "Malcolm, I wanted to talk to you about this. I know you don't think our marriage is salvageable. But maybe we could at least try. See a therapist? Just to make sure we're not making a mistake." He was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the verdant yard of their house. Spring was in full swing. Everything was coming back to life after winter. "I don't know, Laurel," he finally said. "I'm not sure it would make a difference." "What do you have to lose?" she asked quietly. "A few hours of your time. If, after that, you're still convinced we're better off apart, I'll sign the papers without objection. I promise." Malcolm looked at her with surprise. "Why is this so important to you, after everything that's happened?" "Because 15 years don't get thrown away because of one stupid mistake," Laurel replied firmly. "Because I still love you, and because I believe that somewhere deep down inside you still love me too." Malcolm looked away, but Laurel saw his lips twitch. She'd touched something in him, some string that still resonated despite all the hurt and disappointment. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll agree to therapy, a few sessions, but I'm not promising anything." "That's all I'm asking," Laurel smiled, trying hard not to show how hard her heart was pounding. It was a small step, a tiny concession, but it meant everything to her. Dr. Ellen Taylor, the family therapist they'd made an appointment with, was seeing her in a cozy office in downtown Evansville. Soft chairs, dim lights, soothing pastel-colored walls. Everything was designed to make clients feel comfortable. But comfort neither Laurel nor Malcolm felt. They sat in chairs, avoiding looking at each other while Dr. Taylor, a petite woman in her 50s with short, graying hair, studied their forms. "So," she said, looking over her glasses, "I see you've been married 15 years, no children. Malcolm, you're an architect, but currently unemployed. Laurel, you're a nurse in surgery, and you're going through a relationship crisis due to, a recent incident." She's not talking. "Who wants to tell me what happened?" They spoke at the same time, then stopped talking. Dr. Taylor smiled. "Laurel, would you like to start?" Laurel took a deep breath and told the whole story. The loss of Malcolm's job, his depression, her stupid prank idea, her husband's reaction, the casino and the attack, the coma, and the supposed amnesia. She spoke honestly, not sugarcoating or justifying her actions. Malcolm listened in silence, looking at the floor. When Laurel finished, Dr. Taylor turned to him. "Malcolm, how do you perceive what Laurel has told you? Does it fit your view of the situation?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "On the whole, yes. But I wouldn't call it depression. I just lost my direction, a sense of purpose." He looked up. "You know, when you get kicked out of a profession you've dedicated your whole life to, when you suddenly find out that no one wants you with all your knowledge and experience. It knocks the ground out from under your feet. That's understandable, Dr. Taylor nodded. How did you feel about Laurel's prank? How did you feel at that moment? Malcolm grinned wryly. Nothing. Literally nothing. Just a strange numbness. I looked at her with this guy, Finley, and I thought, this is it. The end. There was no anger, no jealousy, just clarity. Like finally seeing the truth that had always been in front of my eyes. And what did you think that truth was? The therapist asked gently. That our marriage was dead, Malcolm answered simply. Maybe not at that moment, maybe much earlier, but that she'd resorted to such a trick instead of just talking to me was the final nail in the coffin. Laurel felt tears coming to her eyes, but she held back. Did you try to talk to her? Dr. Taylor asked. Before the prank happened? Malcolm frowned. What do you mean? You said you lost your direction, your meaning. Did you share that with Laurel? Told her how you felt, your condition? He hesitated. I guess not. I didn't want to burden her. She was already working double time while I stayed home, useless. Malcolm, Laurel interjected, unable to stand it, you were never useless. I never thought I was. Maybe, he shrugged, but that's how I felt. And instead of telling your wife about it, you withdrew into yourself, Dr. Taylor concluded. And Laurel, instead of asking directly what was going on, decided to stage a dramatic situation to provoke a reaction. She looked at both of them. Do I see a communication problem here? Definitely. At the end of the session, Dr. Taylor offered them an assignment. I think it would be helpful to talk to Finley in your situation, together. Malcolm, you said you didn't believe it was just a prank. Maybe if you heard it from him, it might help you rethink the situation. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Malcolm frowned. Why not? Dr. Taylor asked. Because, he hesitated. Because if he confirms what Laurel said, I'll have to admit that I may have overestimated the situation, and then I'd look stupid. And if he doesn't? The therapist looked at him closely. Then Laurel would be lying, and I'm not sure I'm ready for those consequences. Either way, Dr. Taylor said, it would be a step toward clarity, the truth. Isn't that what you want? Malcolm was silent for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. All right, I'll agree to talk to Finley. They met at the same cafe where Laurel had discussed her prank plan with Finley. They arrived a little early and took a table in the corner, away from the other customers. Nervous? Laurel asked, noticing Malcolm tapping his fingers on the table. I don't know. He took a sip of water. It's just weird, dating the guy who made everything go wrong. Technically, not because of him, Laurel corrected him gently. It was my idea. Yeah, but he agreed to it. Malcolm looked at her with a sudden piercing intensity. Why? What was in it for him? Laurel blinked in surprise. Nothing. He just wanted to help, I guess. Men rarely help women without a second thought, Laurel, Malcolm grinned. It's cynical, she shook her head. And untrue. Finley's a good man. He's just a co-worker who saw that I was suffering and agreed to help. Malcolm wanted to say something back, but that's when Finley walked in. He looked a little awkward, but he walked over to their table with an open smile. Hi, he said, extending his hand to Malcolm. It's good to see you in good health. Malcolm paused for a second, then shook his outstretched hand. Thank you. Finley sat down across from them, ordered a coffee from a waitress passing by. There was an awkward silence. So, Finley finally broke the silence. I understand you wanted to talk about that incident. Yes, Laurel nodded. Malcolm wanted to hear your side of the story, about that night and what really happened. Finley looked at Malcolm carefully. Look, I know what it looked like from the outside, but I swear it was just a prank, nothing more. Tell me what it was like from the beginning, Malcolm asked, looking him straight in the eye. Finley took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Laurel came up to me at the hospital, told me you were in trouble. She looked desperate. Said her friend had suggested the jealousy idea, some kind of shock therapy. And you went along with it? Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Just like that? Not just like that, Finley countered, because I've seen her suffer. He paused. Honestly, I thought it was a stupid idea. Told her about it, but she insisted and eventually I agreed. And then what happened? Malcolm asked. You know what happened then. I came to your house, Laurel and I left. Drove around the block and came back 10 minutes later. Finley shrugged. When we got back, you were gone. Malcolm tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. And there was never anything between you two. God, no, Finley exclaimed. Laurel is my co-worker, nothing more. Besides, he blushed slightly, I have a boyfriend. We've been together for 3 years. Malcolm stared at him incomprehensibly. Boyfriend? You're gay. Yeah, Finley nodded. I thought it was obvious. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, his face slowly changing as he realized the irony of the situation. God damn it, he muttered. I made such a drama over nothing, Laurel finished quietly, because of a stupid prank that went wrong. After that meeting, something had changed. Malcolm had become more open, less withdrawn. He still slept in the guest bedroom, still kept his distance, but he started to really talk to Laurel. In the next therapy session, Malcolm admitted that he had reconsidered his position. I think maybe I really rushed into the divorce, he said, looking at his clasped hands. I acted impulsively, out of resentment. That's not the way to end 15 years of marriage. So you're willing to give your marriage another chance? Dr. Taylor asked. I'm willing to try, Malcolm nodded. I can't promise that things will go back to the way they were before, but I'm willing to try. Laurel felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and cautious hope. Gradually, their lives began to find a new rhythm. Malcolm found a job, not with an architectural firm, but with a construction company, where he was offered a position as a project consultant. It wasn't his dream job, but it gave him a sense of usefulness and a steady income. Laurel noticed the change in his posture, his gaze when he started working again. He kept his back straighter. There was a lost sparkle in his eyes. He was no longer a ghost of himself. They still slept in separate rooms, but now they often spent evenings together, watching movies, cooking dinner, even sometimes playing board games, as they had in the early years of their marriage. Conversations were no longer filled with awkward pauses and tension. They began to get to know each other anew. Just when Laurel was beginning to believe that they could really fix things, Malcolm met Audrey Neiman. Audrey was the new head of the project department at the company where Malcolm worked, a tall, energetic woman with short dark hair and a sharp mind. At first meeting, she recognized Malcolm's experience and began to involve him more and more in discussions about important projects. She's terrific, Malcolm told her over dinner. You know, I thought I was stuck in this company as a consultant forever, but Audrey says she sees potential for growth in me. She's offered me the next project on my own. Laurel smiled, trying not to show the slight prick of jealousy she felt. That's great. I'm glad she appreciates you. Yes, He hesitated, she said. She says the architectural community is full of idiots if they let me go. Smart woman, Laurel agreed, putting more salad on his plate. I've always said that. Weeks went by. Audrey's name came up more and more in their conversations. Audrey said, Audrey thinks. Audrey and I were discussing. Laurel tried not to pay much attention to it, but something inside her became alarmed every time he said the name. One evening, as they watched some romantic comedy on television, Malcolm suddenly said, You know, I told Audrey about us. Laurel turned to him, surprised. About us? About what? Well, about what happened, about the prank, about my reaction, about the fact that we're now trying to fix it. And what did she say? Laurel tried to keep her voice casual. She said she understood both of us. Malcolm stared thoughtfully at the screen, unable to see it. She said that if she were you, she'd probably do the same thing, and that if it were me, she'd react the same way. Is she married? Laurel asked, trying to figure out where that insight into family issues came from. Divorced, Malcolm answered. Twice, actually. She says she's had no luck with relationships. He paused. But she's very perceptive. When I told her everything, she recognized the problem. We were both playing games instead of being honest. Laurel felt strangely relieved. So Audrey hadn't swayed him against her, hadn't tried to sully their marriage. A wise woman, she said sincerely. Malcolm turned to her with a new expression in his eyes. Yes, and you know what else she said? That sometimes to really get rid of a grudge, you have to go through it completely, to feel it and then let it go. What do you mean? Laurel frowned. Nothing much. He shrugged and turned back to the movie. Just an interesting thought. Laurel lay awake for a long time that night, thinking about Malcolm's strange tone when he'd talked about the need to feel the hurt. Something about it alarmed her, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Malcolm was staying late at work more and more often. He explained it was because of an important project he and Audrey were working on. Laurel believed it, but sometimes, in the darkness of their bedroom, jealousy and doubt crept into her heart. What if he's doing what she's doing? What if Audrey is his way of getting back at her for the Finley prank? But every time those thoughts crossed her mind, she chased them away. Malcolm isn't like that. He might be withdrawn, he might withdraw into himself, but he wasn't capable of petty revenge, not the kind of man she'd known for 15 years. And yet, something had changed in him. He had become more animated, more energetic, but also more secretive. Sometimes she caught his scrutinizing gaze as if he were gauging her reaction to something. One evening, when he came home from work later than usual, a little tipsy from a company party, he sat down next to her on the couch, closer than usual. You know, he said, looking her straight in the eye, Audrey said something interesting today. Yeah? Laurel felt her heart start to pound faster at his proximity. She said that sometimes you have to let a person feel what you've felt so that they can really understand you. His eyes glittered strangely in the twilight of the living room. What do you think about that? Laurel tensed. It sounds like revenge. Or justice, Malcolm shrugged. Depends on your point of view. Malcolm was staying late at work more and more, explaining that he had an important project with Audrey. Laurel tried not to show concern, but a sense of unease was building inside. Something about his behavior made her uneasy. The way he quickly closed his laptop when she entered the room, the strange looks he cast at her when he thought she couldn't see. Audrey and I have an important meeting with a client today, he said over breakfast. Don't expect me for dinner. Okay, Laurel tried to smile casually. Good luck to you. At the hospital, Laurel shared her concerns with Christine. Do you think they have something? Her friend asked. No, I don't think so. Laurel shook her head slowly. It's just, remember that prank with Finley? I'm afraid that Malcolm might do something similar in retaliation. You know, Christine said thoughtfully, if my husband did what you did, I'd probably want a little revenge too. It's the human thing to do. Back home, Laurel found a note in her mailbox. Come by the Blue Marlin restaurant tonight by 8. I have something to tell you. M. Blue Marlin greeted her with dimmed lights and quiet music. At a table in the corner sat Malcolm with Audrey next to him, tall, with short dark hair and a bright smile. Laurel. Malcolm stood up. I'd like you to meet Audrey. Audrey, this is my wife, Laurel. It's so nice to finally meet you. Audrey held out her hand. Malcolm has told me so much about you. They sat down at the table. Laurel noticed Malcolm and Audrey exchanging strange looks as if they had a secret in common. She asked Malcolm to speak privately. What's going on? She asked, taking him aside. I can see that you're trying to get back at me for that night with Finley." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, just let's go back to the table. This isn't going exactly as I planned." When they returned, they found Audrey pouring wine. "Laurel," Malcolm began, looking her in the eye, "Audrey and we're dating," Audrey finished, taking his hand. "You're dating?" Laurel couldn't believe her ears. "How long?" "A few weeks," Malcolm answered. "It started when we were working on a project late at night, and..." Without thinking, Laurel grabbed the wine glass and threw it in Audrey's face. "You!" she screamed. "You knew we were trying to save our marriage." Audrey didn't look shocked. Instead, she smiled. "Malcolm," she said, "your wife doesn't seem to quite understand the situation." "What's going on here?" Laurel demanded. "A prank, Laurel," Malcolm said, standing up. "Just a prank, like the one you pulled on me with Finley. Audrey and I aren't dating." Laurel noticed that everyone in the restaurant was staring at them and hurried away. Outside, Malcolm and Audrey joined her. "I think I should go," Audrey said, leaving them alone. "Why?" Laurel asked. "Why do this now, when we're starting to get things back on track?" "Because I had to," Malcolm answered, "to make you feel the same way. But now, I realize I'm doing the same thing you're doing, playing stupid games instead of just talking. At home, they talked most of the night, about Malcolm's job, about his feelings after being fired, about Laurel's fears of losing him, about everything that had happened. For the first time in a long time, they actually listened to each other. In the morning, Malcolm went to their bedroom to get clean clothes. He hadn't slept there since he'd gotten back from the hospital. As he was about to leave, he noticed his gun on Laurel's bedside table, loaded with a bullet in the chamber and the safety off. He went downstairs holding the weapon. "What's this?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. Laurel looked at the gun, and her face froze in an expression he couldn't decipher, a mixture of fear, shame, and something else, darker. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "On your nightstand, loaded." Malcolm put the gun on the table. "Laurel, what were you going to do?" She averted her eyes. "I don't know, I just, found it in your desk a few days ago." "Were you thinking about suicide?" Malcolm asked bluntly, his voice trembling. "No," Laurel answered too quickly. "Well, maybe, at some point, when it seemed like it was over, that you'd never forgive me." "And now?" Malcolm asked. "How do you feel now?" Laurel was silent for a long time, staring at the gun lying between them like a strange, deadly symbol of their relationship. "I don't know," she finally answered. "I really don't.